This happened about 15 years ago. I was 21 years old and living in my very first apartment. It was a small bachelor apartment in a sketchy area. I grew up in a town that was known to be rough and tough. I knew how to handle myself and learned at a young age to keep my head down and not to go looking for trouble. My apartment building was behind a bar. A lot of the customers of the bar would stand outside to smoke. When they stood outside to smoke, they would be looking at my apartment. Most of the people who were out smoking kept to themselves. A few would nod and say hello if I passed by. Never any issues, until one evening. One evening I came home from work. I passed the bar and saw this extremely tall man outside smoking. As I passed, he stared at me. I gave him a slight nod, but he didn't acknowledge me. He just continued to stare. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't think much of it. About an hour later, I hear a knock on my door. It was odd because you have to buzz people into the building. The building only had 8 units, and I didn't really know any of the neighbors. I froze because I really didn't want to talk to anyone, but the knocking continued. I finally shouted out, "Who is it?" But there was no response. I shouted again, "Who's there?" And the voice said, "It's Tom." I didn't know anyone named Tom, so I shouted back, "I don't know anyone named Tom. You must have the wrong apartment." The voice said, "You may not know me, but I know you. Open up so we can talk." I went over to the peephole, and it was the tall dude from the bar. I loudly said, "Screw off or I'm calling the cops." I heard his footsteps walk away, and heard the building door open and then close. He was gone, or so I thought. A few minutes later I peeked out the window, and he was standing in the parking lot. He seemed to be talking to himself. At this point, I'm freaking out. I called my landlord who lived in the building next to me. He told me to call the police, and that in the meantime, him and his brother would come check things out. I call the police and tell them what's going on. They said a car is on the way. Meanwhile, my landlord and his brother make their way to the parking lot. I watch out my window and see them approach Tall Dude. Tall Dude takes one look at them and bolts. My landlord and his brother try to chase him, but Tall Dude got away. About 5 minutes later, the police arrive. I give my version of events and also a description of the man. The officer stares at me and says, "We've had reports of a man matching that description who has been sexually assaulting women. Thank God you didn't open the door." A few days later, I get a call from the officer. He told me part of their investigation was talking to the owner of the bar. The owner called the police when Tall Dude reappeared after a few days, and the police responded and arrested him. So, tall creepy dude from the bar, it was a close call, and I sincerely hope I never see you again. My mom's dog, Punky, was a very sweet, loving dog. She was an ESA dog, but trained to be a service dog for PTSD before she lost her leg. I had never seen her get aggressive with anyone in the entire 12 years she lived. She never growled or nipped anyone, and she had no sense of smell, so she loved all animals and people, a real gentle giant among our little terriers at 60 pounds. What I'm getting at here was that her barking at something and being aggressive was so wildly uncharacteristic that I only saw it once. I was at home with my siblings, my then stepdad is at work, and my mom ran up to the gas station to grab a pack of cigarettes. It was only a mile or 2 away from us. For reference, we lived in a 2-bedroom trailer in the middle of the woods, on a dead-end road at the time, and you had to really make an effort to get down our road, find our house, navigate down our rickety driveway, and find the door. I'm sitting at the computer, having a grand time watching YouTube videos, when all of a sudden all of our dogs, about 2 Boston Terriers and 1 Chihuahua, perk up, bark a few times, and start investigating down the hall. My siblings were napping in the bedroom at the end of the hall at the time, so I figured they just stirred and scared the dogs. But then Punky sits up suddenly, stands up on the couch, and puffs her chest out. Her ears are perked up, her fur standing on end, her tail straight up, and then she barks. Loudly, I mean. The bark booms through the living room and echoes around, and all of a sudden she lunges off of the couch and goes tearing down the hallway. I'm already on edge because I don't think I've heard her bark ever. She's a Basenji mix, so her bark is more of a baying sound, but this was a big, loud, alert bark. I stand up and go to look down the hallway, ready to fight off what I'm assuming is a shadow monster in the hallway based on how the dogs are acting. But then I hear it. Knock, knock, knock. We didn't get visitors because of how weird our house was location-wise, so my 11-year-old mind had no clue what to do here. The only people who showed up were family, and they didn't knock, so I slowly walked towards the door. The knock drew the attention of the dogs, and they came running back down the hallway, all except for Punky, and I felt better with our 3 yappy dogs in the room with me, even if they were all the size of New York City sewer rats. I opened the door just a bit, and standing on our porch is the sketchiest man I think I've ever seen. I can still picture him perfectly. He was a really thin, taller man with dark hair and a sunken face, bags under his eyes, and this half-managed hair, sort of like he just gave it a quick brush and then figured it was good enough. Everything about him seemed just a little too thin, a little too shallow, and his clothes were all off too. They were nice, but fake nice, you know, like a clean, newer looking t-shirt and new jeans. But he had what looked like a suit jacket on. All his clothes were dark too, despite the fact that it was summer in Texas. And the weather was definitely over 100 degrees that day. He also had this plain, unlabeled bottle in his hand. It looked like the label had been covered up and taped over. I stare up at him in confusion because I definitely don't know this man, and I ask what he wants. He smiles at me in this way that's way too fake, like this exaggerated and forced grin, and he spoke in the same voice retail workers do. Hey there, kiddo. I'm trying to sell this here carpet cleaner, and he shakes the bottle at me. Mind if I come in to show you how good it works? Alarms are going off in my head because he just seemed so off. Looking back with an adult perspective, the fact that he didn't ask if my parents were home is unnerving because he probably knew they weren't. And that's why he was here in the first place. I should have told him to get off our property, that I'd have to go get my mom, something except what I did say, but I didn't. Instead, I just shook my head and said, no, we don't have carpet. Well, it works on other things. And he took a big step towards the door and shook the bottle at me. I start to freak out and think to close the door, but the thing is, our front door didn't even lock, so that's basically useless. I'm sure there's something very wrong about to happen, and I'm terrified as I think about what to do in the few seconds I think I have before it does happen, when all of a sudden I hear it. Punky had crept up from the hallway, lowered towards the ground with her teeth bared and snarling like she was feral. She had slobber just dripping from her mouth. Her ears were down and she was ready to pounce. The guy hears it too, and as I look towards Punky, she tries to lunge past me, and I just barely catch her with my leg as she tries her hardest to duck past me and attack this guy. He freaks out and runs off the porch without another word, booking it down the driveway as I let Punky out along with the rest of our dogs. And they start chasing him. Our small dogs chase him down the driveway and stop about halfway, barking and jumping about, but Punky stops just on the porch and watches him with her ears perked, just staring in the distance until he disappears. I swear I saw someone join up with him running when he got onto the road. The second he disappeared, Punky's entire body language changed and she went back to being the sweet dog I knew. No barking or growling, just laying around, mouth and throat covered in slobber still. I realized my siblings are still down the hall and run to check on them. And when I get to the bedroom, my siblings were sleeping soundly still, but the bedroom window was wide open, the curtains pushed all to one side, and the items on the dresser in front of the window all shoved around. Someone had tried to climb through the window, no doubt in my mind about it. From what I can gather, the bedroom window was visible from the couch where Punky was sleeping, so I think someone was trying to climb through the window before Punky went after them and scared them off, and the man at the door was meant to distract me. They definitely didn't expect Punky, a bigger dog, because most of the time she was with my mom inside while our small dogs were the ones that saw public eye more often. I don't know what they intended to do, but after my mom got home she took all of us to my aunt's house, and on our way there we saw the men walking up someone else's driveway. Men plural, because we watched a second one split off to wait by the road. So, to the 2 men apparently going door to door to sell their unlabeled carpet cleaner, I'd really rather not meet again. It finally started raining here, so I took my son out mushroom hunting over the weekend. It was later than we normally go, and sun goes down much earlier. But we were taking a quick trail to the river, and back in hopes to finding turkey tails or chanterelles. We took a wrong turn and ended up going through a big field, which the trail would take us back around to the main trail to the river. As we walked toward the main trail, the last group of people had left, and it was just me and my son. We walked along, and out of a thicket side trail came this weird man. He had a dog with him that was alert at his side. He was staring at us as we walked closer towards him. Then he started waving at us, this really weird, slow wave. I was immediately uncomfortable and goosebumpy, but didn't want to be impolite, so I half-hearted waved back while staring back and telling my son to slow up a little. I didn't want to actually meet up at the junction. After a full minute of us dawdling, the guy slowly turned and began walking down the trail toward the main trail. I was wary walking, didn't want to go too fast, and we stopped to look at some plants. So the guy and dog got further down this trail, which curved to the right and continued on 2 blocks to the junction. I was thinking, if this was a creepy let's not meet, this dude will be waiting around the corner. And sure enough, he was standing at the junction, off to the left and toward the parking lot, and to the right was a 0.6-mile trail to the river. Dude was just standing there, with his dog, staring at us, not moving at all. Both my son and I were like, holy hell, let's keep wide to the right. And saying he looks old, we could run faster than him, and just generally planning for freaky deaky just in case. He kept staring at us, so as we approached, I asked if he was okay and kept staring back. He was greasy-haired, tiny round glasses, a blue windbreaker, plaid lawn shorts, about 50 years old. His dog was small beagle mix. He didn't answer me at all, just kept staring. We turned to the right and walked about a block. I had my phone cam facing me so I could watch him over my shoulder, and the only movement was him slowly shifting his direction to continue staring at us. I didn't say anything else to him. It was moderately unsettling, his stare, made more so by his lack of response. Emotionless face, weird tiny glasses, slow wave at us like a zombie. He did leave on our way back. He was no longer standing on the main trail. So hey, freaky deaky forest zombie dude, for sure stay in the thickets and let's not meet. This is something that happened to me a couple years back that still freaks me out when I think about it. To start with, this was at around midnight, and I was in my room browsing stuff on my phone when I suddenly hear what sounds like knocking outside my bedroom window, ground level. I first shrugged it off as being a squirrel or something until I heard the same sounds again, which is when I started becoming concerned. It was at this point that I left my room and called my dad to tell him about what was happening. He tried to reassure me it was nothing. And while this was happening, I heard even more knocking coming from around the front door. I tried calling out to see if it was my brother or anything, but didn't get any answers. At this point, I was starting to really freak out. It was after this that I heard someone at my back door trying to force the door open. It was locked, thankfully. And finally, after this, my dog had caught on and started barking like crazy at the other end of the door, which finally drove whoever was out there off. After that happened, I called my grandpa, who lived a block over, to come and pick me up because I was way too scared to be able to stay the night in that house. In retrospect, I should have called the police, but I wasn't thinking straight, and had been shivering on the couch holding a kitchen knife the whole time I was waiting. I still have no idea who was out there that night. I had taken a walk alone in a nature trail earlier that day, and my only working theory is that someone had followed me home. I later learned there were drifters living in the woods around that area, which adds to that. I have no evidence of that though. This was probably the scariest experience I've been through, and it still makes it hard for me to stay home alone at night. Hi guys, this is a real story that has absolutely traumatized me and my boyfriend. 2 years ago, I moved to the UK for university, as I always wanted to go there and get away from my parents, as the situation at home was beginning to become too toxic for me. And first year at uni, I moved into a student accommodation center and met some really great people. It was a good year without meeting my boyfriend, who I am still with, and just enjoying my time away from my family and discovering what independence really meant. Anyhow, as second year came by, I decided with some friends to move into a house rented by student accommodations, but at least we had our own house and weren't restricted as much with noise and parties as living in a small shared flat like in first year. Note, I had a ground floor room and my window gave into a very small backyard in which I would go smoke every day, and in which there would be a very thin wooden door giving into the other side of the street where you would put your bins and broken chairs, blah blah. The door could only be closed and locked from inside the backyard, but since it was an old door we had to attach some strings to keep it closed for good. I had neighbors on each side of the house, so we were surrounded by families and some other student accommodations. The neighbors on the right of us were 5 boys who looked way over the age of being in university. They were strange, so to say. I met one of them outside of our house one day because of a police intervention due to one of his flatmates attacking him, and the others with a kitchen knife and burning their kitchen down. I heard some screams, and so I went outside with my flatmates and saw one of them being covered in blood and cuts everywhere on his arm and a wound on his head inflicted by a kitchen knife. Me and my flatmates didn't know what to do, so we offered him our help to clean himself and gave him an old t-shirt to change out of his bloody clothes. We then saw the guy who hurt these flatmates being escorted out by the police and into a van and driven off to be arrested. I don't know anything more about the story. The police didn't really tell us anything else. Anyway, the guy who we helped was quite weird, and we noticed when helping him he smoked quite a lot of marijuana, but just didn't really care at the moment, as we just wanted to make sure he was okay as we didn't know him. Then after some time had passed, I would go to uni and come back home and see him quite often in the street, and just never said a word to him again. But one day, he came up to me in the street while I went to the corner shop and started talking to me weirdly, and I didn't feel comfortable at all with that for some reason, so I just didn't respond to him. He then just said, "Oh, that's okay, I'll just wait in front of your house then, and we can talk further." No need to say I was creeped out and just thought he was joking, so I bought my drink at the shop and headed back to my street. And as I turned into the street where my house was, I saw him with his flatmate sitting on my doorstep and waiting for me. So I panicked and went back next to the corner shop and called my only guy flatmate to ask him to open the door and tell the guys to go away, but obviously he wasn't home and no one else was either, so I literally just waited it out until they left 1 hour later, and then sprinted back home and locked the front door. Note, my front door had a glass panel on it where you would be able to kind of make out who was standing in front of it. After this already pretty scary encounter, I just tried to avoid the guy and mostly succeeded for a while. But then one day, as I went smoking in the backyard, I noticed that the wooden door, which is always closed, was open, and the strings that we put there to keep it closed were cut off. For whatever reason, I didn't think anything of it, and just closed the door again and put a new string on it, thinking it was one of my flatmates who took the bins out and just didn't tie it back. The weird neighbors would very often scream and yell and fight in their house, and it would wake me and my flatmates up in the middle of the night, but we kinda got used to it after a while. But one evening, my boyfriend slept over like he usually did, and he, who usually never ever wakes up because of a noise, woke up in the middle of the night because of a bang and some whispering. I was sound asleep, so he very silently woke me up, and we both just waited in the dark and listened for any other noises. Suddenly we heard the wooden door just bang, just shot open, and some footsteps next to my window. I always had my window open because it would get really warm inside, so we both just froze. And then we heard the door leading to the backyard get shaken softly, as if they were trying to get inside, and then they stopped. Luckily we had the curtains closed, so they couldn't see us, but we were ready to get dressed and get the F out of the room and lock them in if they came in from the window. Then we just heard my window move and get more open, and one of the guys saying something in a different language that we didn't understand, and started to hear them trying to get in. My boyfriend and I just shot up out of the bed, took my phone, and put clothes on and ran out of the room and out of the house. So I then called my flatmates and told them to lock themselves in their rooms. And then the police, who luckily came in less than 5 minutes, as the headquarters were a couple of streets down from us. I don't remember anything after the police came. I think me and my boyfriend were in shock. They ended up catching one guy, the other fled and was later found a few streets up smoking weed. The police told us they went inside of their house and found a lot of drugs, and that they were just carrying a massive kitchen knife with them. I was so confused as I've never done anything to offend or do anything wrong to my neighbors, so the idea of them breaking in with God knows what intentions with a kitchen knife terrorized me and my boyfriend. The two guys ended up being arrested, and one of them was put in prison for 2 years for carrying a weapon with intention to harm. I never heard anything else from the police, and I moved back home a few months later as I was so scared, and it tormented me for months on end not knowing what would have happened if my boyfriend didn't wake up. I'm now still coping with it and finding it really tough to get over it, of always asking myself what if and what would have happened if. I now very often wake up because of the slightest noise and get horrible nightmares because of it, but hey, at least I'm still with my boyfriend and we often talk about it, and it helps a lot. Hello, I just came across this subreddit, and gosh, some of these are terrifying. I do have a story of something that happened to me from a long while ago, but in hindsight it was really dumb of me and I feel terribly dumb now, so I've always been hesitant to tell a lot of people I know about it, except for my psychiatrist. And I always apologize for long posts, so it's so hard not to hear. There were some other conversations had with this man named John. It was mostly him talking, but I left some of them out for length's sake. This was a few years ago. It was pretty late, past 1:30 at night. I was living with this boy, who was pretty abusive, and he had gotten really jealous at this party we were at earlier. That night, not even an hour after we had gotten home, he tossed me out onto our front porch and locked the door behind me. I was knocking and pleading for him to please let me back inside. I was still wearing what I had worn to the party and it was freezing out. I wasn't sure what to do. He had my phone, purse, and wallet in the house with him, so I just sat on the porch crying. When he turned off the lights both inside and outside of the house, I knew he wasn't going to let me back in. I felt so helpless and cold. I thought about knocking on a neighbor's door, though he didn't have many, but I had anxiety about waking any of them up and causing trouble for my boyfriend. So instead I decided I would try to walk to this gas station and motel, which was like a little less than a mile away, so I could use their phone to try to call a girlfriend of mine to see if I could sleep over with her. Ironically enough, the road I was walking on was Donner Pass Road, so the freezing cold was fitting. But anyway, a little bit into the walk, this tall white pickup truck was approaching on the opposite side of the road that I was on. I tried not to make eye contact for obvious reasons, but then I heard the truck stopping and beginning to make a U-turn, and my heart just started pounding. I just about froze up but forced myself to speed walk at the very least. The truck pulled up to me, and this guy rolled down his window and asked what I was doing out this late. I told him how I was going to meet my friend at the gas station and that she was expecting me. He sort of smiled and offered me a ride. I said no thank you, citing that I shouldn't hitchhike. He told me, well good, I don't pick up hitchhikers or anyone. You don't look like a hitchhiker though, you just look like you need some help. He just kept driving next to me and told me I shouldn't think he was a creep, and he pulled out what looked like a police badge and told me he had just gotten off duty, which is why he was in civilian clothes and out so late. He said he wouldn't mind driving next to me just to make sure I get to where I was heading safely. I was naive and a bit too trusting of his kindness and credentials. And when he offered me a ride again, I said that it would be nice because the gas station wasn't that far away anyway. He popped the door open for me and I hopped in. The radio was low, it was a little messy, the ashtray was full of cigarettes. There were a lot of newspapers on the passenger floor. As I was moving my feet, some of the papers shifted, showing a pair of handcuffs, some coffee cups, empty water bottles, rags, and some other things. He apologized, saying that it was the truck he took hunting, but it was super warm, so I was happy and didn't mind at all. He told me his name was John. He asked why I was scantily dressed without a jacket, and I started to tell him about the party and the fight I had been in with my boyfriend. He was super charming and attentive. He even laughed that he could go back and arrest him. I asked about him and he told me about his family. He was a young dad. He had a wife, a daughter, a son, and a dog, and I told him it was like he had the perfect little family, and he laughed and said he certainly did. Then it had sort of clicked for me to ask him I could use his phone. but he said no because he had to save his battery. We were approaching the gas station, and he drove right past it. I politely said, "Oh, I think that's the one," but he didn't answer me. I felt sick to my stomach. My heart started pounding. I started getting choked up. My eyes started tearing up as I was looking out the windows and watching the lights behind us getting further and further away. It was hard for me to even speak, but somehow I murmured, asking if he could please turn around, and he ignored me. Whenever I would look at him, he just looked empty-eyed and emotionless, totally dead and glazed. I looked back out the window and down at the road to see if maybe we were going slow enough that I could make a leap out of the car without seriously injuring myself. I remember always hearing never go to the second location, but I thought about the possibility of jumping out and breaking an ankle and how it would be a lot harder to get away with one foot as opposed to two, debating with myself that there was snow on the ground. But then again, snow is hard to get along in, especially when you're not fully clothed. I feel so dumb now too because I wasn't even tied up or anything. I was just so scared though. Like there was nothing but trees, an empty road, and us. I was crying pretty badly at this point and asked if I could please borrow his phone again. I don't know why I even asked, and he told me to stop talking. Then he started talking underneath his breath saying, "Girls shouldn't be out so late. You shouldn't have been alone this late. Look what you're doing to me," dressed all sexy, and other derogatory things. As he kept saying these terrible things, too many to type out here, I wasn't even responding. I was just crying and trying to think past the fear I was feeling. I remembered the pair of handcuffs I remember seeing under the papers beneath my feet, so I used that little, I don't know how to describe it, like scoopy motion. I managed to use my feet to scoop the handcuffs up and use my heels and toes to push them under the bottom of my seat as far as I could. I was thinking of different things I could do to try to help myself, like if we were close enough to some upcoming lights or structures, I could just grab the wheel and cause us to crash into them. Or maybe how if I got lucky enough for a cop to pass us, I could grab the wheel and swerve so he would appear to be a drunk driver and we'd get pulled over. I guiltily thought about the possibility if this man is just having a weird night, and how if I did anything it would hurt him, but I told myself that sort of thinking sort of got me into this mess. He pulled off road where there were still woods on both sides of us. On his side the wooded trees were closer to the road. On mine, there was a small gap fully covered in thick, I don't know how many feet of snow, before the trees thickly picked up maybe 10 to 16 yards away. He turned off the car and coldly said there was something wrong with the car and to get out with him. As he grabbed the keys and was stepping out of the car, I grabbed onto the center console and cried and pleaded not to make me get out with him because it was too cold. He turned around to face me, his door still open, and shouted at me to get out of the car because we had to go check out the trunk bed hatch. I dug my fingernails deeper into the console, thinking my cries of no and head shaking would cause him to come around to my side of the car and drag me out himself. I was crying and said, "Please, John, I'm so cold and scared." I was thinking of everything I ever heard. Humanize yourself. Use first names. He stared at me in this like way I can't even describe it to this day. I don't even know how to start. He got back in the car, and I slinked towards my window, scared he would drag me over the console. He turned off the headlights, and everything just looked dark blue. He stared at the steering wheel for what felt like years, before lighting a cigarette and looking out his window, and back at me and then back out his window. He heard me shuffle my feet on the newspapers. I was just adjusting my legs, but while still staring out his window told me if I thought about running, he had a quick way to get me where he wanted me. And oddly enough, I was sort of thinking of running minutes before that, but reasoned that if he wanted me out of the car then I should definitely stay in. Otherwise he could chase me or shoot me in case he had hunting rifles in the back. I didn't dare look. I'm glad I was right. I think at that point I sort of hit some sort of bottom of my reserve. And instead of panic, there was numbness and exhaustion. There were still an occasional hot tear or two, but I just remember being numb. I talked to a psychiatrist about this sort of thing, and he thinks it just came from my ex-boyfriends giving me PTSD. It was dead quiet, but I finally just barely audibly told him that my friend was still waiting for me and asked about his wife and children, and he flatly said he didn't have a wife or children and that his house was empty. I asked him what he was thinking about and he said, "I'm thinking of what to do with you." He didn't say it angrily. He just said it flatly and coldly, which sort of scared me more. I did start getting worked back up to a cry at that point, and he told me not to cry and turned the car on, offering me some heat. I just cried and said I wanted to go home. Eventually, he started driving and kept driving until we were approaching a gas station. I was gauging the right time to reach for the wheel, but before I could, he started slowing down. While pulling up, he told me not to tell anyone or he would find me. Then he told me all he was doing was teaching me a lesson not to hitchhike with strangers. He was almost coming to a complete stop when he told me to get out before he changes his mind, before he could even get another look at me to assess my understanding. I was already down out of the truck and sprinting towards the gas station. The panic was overwhelming me, but then I stopped and remembered to try to see his license plate. I turned around but only caught the blur of the last 3 numbers as he was driving off. I ran inside and asked the clerk behind the counter to please call the police. I waited until the officer got there, and I'll be honest, I was a little scared it would be John. My fears melted away. When the new-faced policeman got there, I gave him the description of John, his appearance, the vehicle color and type, the parts of the license plate number I had caught, the fact he said he was an off-duty cop. Just basically anything I could. I asked him if he could look at the camera, and the officer disappeared in the back for a little bit, then came back out saying there was nothing on them. I asked if I would be able to look, and the officer said no, and asked me if I didn't trust him, and I told him of course I did. The officer gave me a ride to my friends, lecturing me for hitchhiking, consisting of him repeatedly asking if I knew who Ted Bundy was. I never heard anything back about the report that was made, so I would try to follow up, and each time I did, they never got back to me aside from this one time I was told my case number didn't exist. But that didn't stop me from trying to follow up. Throughout the months and years, I asked my friend whose home I slept over at that one night if she ever heard of any weirdness or anything since that incident had happened to her or anyone up there, and she always says no. So I sort of let it go and try to tell myself that maybe he actually was just trying to teach me a lesson or something. I mean, I definitely never hitchhiked again, so if it was a lesson, it certainly worked. I never heard anything back having to do with the case. I never heard of any other odd experiences up there. Maybe it was just one man trying to teach me something. But honestly, sometimes I think I tell myself all of that to help me sleep better at night. It all felt really real. Even if it wasn't real, I'm really glad I didn't get out of the car in the woods that night. This has also been super therapeutic to let out, so thank you so much for letting me post here. Quick backstory, I've had a stalker for about 4 years. He was never aggressive or sent me proper threats. So, stubborn as I am, I did my best to ignore him and not give him the satisfaction of showing him any fear, to be honest. After a while, I also wasn't scared anymore since he almost never came close to me. I know being stalked can affect people severely even in a case like mine, and that's totally valid, but I guess I just got lucky and was never really psychologically affected by it. His stalking behavior mostly just consisted of sending me letters and gifts such as photos of my own apartment building from the outside, things he dug out of my trash can, and so on. I called the police many times, but they weren't able to or really didn't try to catch or identify him. About 3 weeks ago, I discovered the German version of r/IAMA and thought that people might want to know about what it's like to have a stalker, since I barely use any social media aside from Reddit and have no personally identifying information here. I didn't think he'd ever see it. One person even asked, "Does he know you're putting him on blast on Reddit?" And I answered maybe. Maybe it would make him angry. Maybe he would be turned on. Don't know, don't care. Well, I know the real answer now. He did see it, and he did not like it. Like I said, he was never aggressive and never came close to me. The closest I know of was when he sent me a picture of myself unlocking my apartment door, taken from the corner of the steps above. Sorry if that makes no sense. I don't know how else to explain it, but I consider myself a pretty vigilant person, and I'm thinking that he might have hid a camera there instead of being there to take the photo himself. I think I would have noticed him if he did. I don't know how he got wind of the subreddit, but he did. The next week was quiet, no letters, and I didn't see him anywhere. Then he left me letters with printed out questions and my answers from the subreddit. He also left me a long, hateful letter towards my boyfriend about an issue I had posted on the German version of the subreddit. His letters were never hateful like that before, though he never seemed happy with my boyfriend. He wrote about how I should share the spotlight with him since I got so much attention thanks to him. A few days later, I got a gift. But this time he didn't leave it in my mailbox or at my car like he usually did. No, this time he left it inside the apartment building right in front of my door. I didn't take it inside my apartment but opened it outside. It was a pretty big box, which was also unusual, and it was taped shut. As I'm typing it out, I realize that wasn't a good idea at all and could have ended badly for me, but luckily he didn't send me a bomb or anything. He did, however, send me several zip ties, a roll of tape, the kind you use to tape off walls when painting, nothing you could use to restrain someone, a TV remote with most buttons picked off, a pack of band-aids with a few used ones not actually, just made to look that way according to the police, and a framed picture of me. I could tell the picture was taken a few days ago, and my boyfriend was next to me but cut out of the photo. The frame was shattered, and the package was full of glass shards, clearly more than just what could have fallen out of the frame, and they were also intentionally put inside the crumbled newspaper that was stuffed in there to keep it all in place. I called the police right away and gave it to them. They were more concerned this time finally, thanks, and told me they'd send patrol cars more frequently. He didn't show up or leave me any letters or gifts for about another week and a half. But 8 days ago it started again. I found letters in my mailbox where he wrote about how he wasted his time on me, how I haven't been appreciating his effort, how he was wrong about me being special. 5 days ago I left my apartment in the morning and heard a crunch sound as I stepped on my doormat. He put broken glass under it in the night. I went off to work because I was in a hurry and was just going to make my boyfriend call the police. But then I found my car had also been vandalized. The sides were scratched, lights smashed, and the windshield had a phrase painted on. "It's time soon," followed by my last name, along with some German phrase painted onto the car. I went back inside and called the cops myself. They found the same phrase on a note under the doormat. This time they really took me seriously, which might have been because I was just pissed at this point, which I made very clear. If for some reason you're like me and just too stubborn to be afraid of a stalker like mine, then all of this, the letters, gifts, photos, even the damn glass under my doormat, are just really annoying. But my car was useless to me now, and the threat scared even me. I did, however, have a dash cam in my car, and it caught everything. The police took the footage as evidence even though the dash cam footage wasn't of high quality, and I had given them photos of him that were just as good before, but they said it's not sufficient. And they told me they'll look into it further and promised to send more patrol cars again. Then it was quiet for 2 more days, until 2 days ago, someone rang the doorbell at just after 4 a.m. My boyfriend and I got up, but we were both hesitant, but I saw blue lights outside, and just as I got up I heard them shouting, "This is the police. Please open the door." They told us they were called by one of our downstairs neighbors who came home from his night shift about an hour early and heard someone else enter the building after them before the door fell shut. My neighbors know of my situation, and I've asked them to make sure they don't let strangers into the building. This neighbor then went into his own apartment and looked through the peephole. We have motion activated lights in the stairway, so he waited to see if they turned back on. They did. Then he saw a middle-aged man walk upstairs. Above this neighbor are only me and my boyfriend, and a single mom with 3 kids who probably won't be getting any visitors at 3 a.m., so he called the police. They came and found my stalker 1/2 floor above me on the stairs. He should have been able to see the cop cars since there's a little window up there, and they had their lights on, but he either missed them or wanted to get caught. They found a pocket knife on him, and he confessed to being my stalker right away. He's finally caught. They got him. It took 4 years, a provocative Reddit post, and one very vigilant and caring neighbor, but he's finally done. For now at least. He's facing several charges, and I've collected every single piece of evidence over the past 4 years. I don't know what kind of outcome I can expect, but for now I finally got some peace. America Online was a big thing when I was 13, or in other words for my generation AIM, which stood for, you guessed it, AOL Instant Messenger. It was around 2002, and I would have been a fresh 13. And in 8th grade, I had many times went into chat rooms by myself, or with friends goofing around. Unfortunately, unsolicited photos were a thing then too, but usually you could stay clear of it by the chat room you entered. I didn't have any photos of myself, and back when you had to take a digital photo and upload it from your camera, plus I was 13 and self-conscious, which I'm sure anyone can relate with. But one day a guy popped up on my screen wanting to chat. It went fine at first. I was very naive back then, and we quickly fell into a pattern of talking. His name was Dave and lived in California. Eventually him telling me he loved me. But the problem was he was 19. Now I wasn't proud of this, but at first at 13, I just sent pictures of some random girl and said it was me. He instantly fell for me, telling me age is just a number and how mature I was. Now at this point he did not live in state, so there was never any chance of us meeting. Eventually he told me he and his mom were moving up to a city that was about an hour and half away from me. He started begging me to see him and go to a movie, anything. I had to break the catfishing truth and say those were not pictures of me but of someone else. He was furious. He had been looking forward to a different type of child this whole time. Dave forgave me a few days later, saying, I still want to meet you because I love you. All the things you say to a young girl to get her to swoon. I think back and I'm like, wow, I was 13. So I told my best friend everything I just explained above, and that I wanted her to go with me to meet him. There was a whole plan about him driving to see me and going to the movies to finally meet what I thought was the love of my life. I had been brainwashed into believing this was normal. I didn't tell my mom, of course, and honestly she didn't notice any of it. She's never been too involved, if you catch my drift. So the day my friend and I were going to meet up with Dave, her mom came and picked us up from school. She said something that made my stomach drop into nothingness. She said, Chrissy, you are not going to the movies. You are not going to meet that man. You are going to get seriously hurt or kidnapped, and I can't allow you guys to go. I cried and cried because I honestly thought I could handle everything and be fine. She told me she wasn't going to tell my mom. I had to promise to never speak to him again and never plan to meet a stranger online. He ended up showing up and was upset I wasn't there. He went on AIM flying off the handle like I hadn't seen at that age. That scared me. It scared me how close I was to this man being near me. I never talked to Dave again, but I easily believe I would have been kidnapped, or worse that day if my best friend's mom hadn't stepped in. My mom would have been none the wiser. I was none the wiser, but I am here today and learned a dire lesson. Nobody is what they seem, and make sure to keep your kids close. This happened several years ago. I was home alone one evening when I heard a knock at the back door. This confused me, as no one ever used that door. My husband and I lived in a fourplex at the time, and all of the units had a back door at the top of a narrow staircase. These doors were a little inconvenient to access, as you'd have to go around the building and up the narrow stairs, as opposed to the wider main entrance at the front. It didn't make sense to use the back entrance, and I couldn't think of anyone who would go to that door to visit. As I approached the back door, I saw two tall men in the window, standing at the door. A chill went down my spine. I did not feel safe opening the door, so I called out, "Hello." One of the men tapped on the window. "Yes, hello. May we come in? We are with Bresnan." At the time, my husband and I had Bresnan for cable but did not have any issues with it. I replied, "We're not having any issues with Bresnan. Is there a problem?" "Ma'am," the man said, "can we come in? We're servicing the area, and it's important we look at your cable." I shook my head. "We're not having any issues," I repeated, "so there's no need to stop by." "Ma'am, we are visiting every resident. Let us in so we can do our job." I noticed the man grab the doorknob and try to open the locked door. I slowly grabbed a knife from our knife block and held it at my chest. "We're not having any issues," I repeated, trying not to convey shakiness of my voice. "So you don't need to be here." The two figures appeared to shuffle and then straighten. "Ma'am, let us in. We're on a deadline and need to do our job." I glanced at the clock, gauging when my husband would arrive home from work. I gripped the knife tighter. "Ma'am," I saw him try the doorknob again. I closed my eyes and felt overwhelming gratitude of always locking my doors. Just then, a thought came to the forefront of my mind. "I'm sorry I can't help you. Could I please get your names and badge numbers? I can give your supervisor a call to let them know our cable is fine." I heard another shuffle, and one of the men replied, "No need to, ma'am. We're sorry we wasted your time." With that, both of the men exited the staircase and disappeared into the night. Shaken up, I held the knife tight and tried to get my bearings. I remember making a mental note to call the cable company or the police, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold my phone, with the knife still grasped to my chest and the phone falling out of my other hand. I sank to the floor and cried. When my husband returned home, I told him what had happened. I was still very shaken up and had started crying again after he came home. He immediately called the Bresnan Cable Company and spoke to a representative who informed us that no one from their company was out on assignment in our area. The next day, we asked our neighbors if they had a visit from the company. No one had, so to the two creepy men who tried to break into my home under the guise of cable repair, let's not meet. Hi, this only happened a few hours ago, so I'm shaken, but it's too early in the morning to phone and wake up friends, and I needed to talk to someone and get this out. I'm so creeped out and concerned, so I thought of coming here. Brief setting and context. I'm a woman in my 30s, caring for my elderly parents, so staying in a downstairs room in my childhood home at the moment. The window faces the main street, which is an average residential street in a fairly quiet area. The bed faces the window. I often leave the window open at night since I need it to be cool to sleep, and I haven't really worried about it since there's a cabinet with an aquarium in front of the window, not blocking the window from view, and I can reach to open and close it, but it would make it difficult for someone to climb in. My dog, Sable, also always sleeps in the room with me. While she's a sweet-natured, medium-sized dog who doesn't look the least bit threatening, she's a fantastic guard dog in that she's always alert to any noises and will stand her ground and bark and growl if she senses a threat. So I've never really worried about the open window. After tonight, I won't be able to do it again. It started at maybe 3:30 or 4 a.m. sometime. I was awake. Since I care for my parents, I often have disrupted sleep patterns, and I'm awake at odd hours. I was reading a book and heard Sable growl, low and deep. Then she jumped off the bed and began pacing a bit, looking up at the window, before jumping up at the cabinet by the window, barking. I shouted, "Hey, we're calling the police, dog will bite," just in case there was someone there, and went to look out of the curtains to the side. I didn't see anything. I pulled the curtains closed again and made sure to pull the right curtain over, then drew the left side curtain, the one that covers the open part of the window, all the way over, covering the right side curtain too, tucking it down so any wind wouldn't be able to move it. I wasn't really alarmed then. It's a fairly quiet residential street, but there are foxes around that we sometimes hear, and occasionally someone passing by or the neighbor's gate next door will make Sable react. But she doesn't usually react the way she did this time. She'll usually growl, but stay on the bed, and her reaction was much stronger than normal. I thought that even if it was someone scoping out the open window to potentially burgle, they'd seen now that the room was occupied by a person and dog, and would go find an easier target. But mainly I guessed it was just a random noise she'd heard outside. I was wrong. It was a good half hour or more later, after I've relaxed and thought I might doze off soon, that I heard her growl again, a really serious, deep and low growl, and I listened again, thinking it might be foxes or something, but I heard what sounded like deep, horror movie breathing noises, like the heavy breathing sounds a pervert makes down the phone to his stalking victim in a film. I sat up, looked up at the window, and my heart stopped. The curtain had been pulled back and lifted at the bottom, like someone peeking under it, and I could still hear the heavy breathing. I shouted "hey" again and moved from the bed to the side of the window so I could see past the curtain, and saw the figure of a man move away from the window to the right towards the front door and the exit of the front garden. Too dark to make out features or clothing, it was just a dark male figure. Shaking, I immediately thought that since I knew he'd moved away and wasn't at or under the window, I reached and pulled it shut, grabbed my phone, and called the emergency services. One thing that creeps me out, in hindsight, is that it would have taken a few seconds for me to move from the bed to the side of the window, and that was after I'd shouted and he knew he'd been seen. But he must have stayed there even knowing I'd seen him, until I moved the curtain and could see out. Then he moved away. The heavy breathing also had to be deliberate. It was so loud, like someone trying to frighten me. While on the phone with police, I went around the ground floor of the house turning lights on, making sure the rest of the house was still secure, and it was. Very careful to lock doors and all the other windows at night. And everything looked undisturbed. 2 patrol officers came shortly before 5 a.m. and took the report. They suggested asking the neighbors if they have camera footage and to let them know of a potential prowler in the area tomorrow, and they went to drive around the area, saying that they'd be wanting to know what someone was doing wandering around at 5 a.m. the time the police arrived anyway. Since the dark meant I only saw the shape of a person, no real description, I doubt they can do much. I couldn't even be 100% certain it was a man. But the breathing and the figure I saw instantly made me think male. The outline of his head looked smooth, so either bald or wearing a tight cap, and height would have been average, 5'8" or 5'10". I'm still shaken, but feeling angry and violated, and wishing we had a camera system now. We'll be looking into that. I never thought anything like that would happen. Don't have any enemies, no recent exes, no one I know of harboring any grudges. Since I'm caring for my folks full time now, I'm not out socializing or making any enemies, nor are my elderly and disabled parents. I'm at the wrong side of 35 and living in jeans or joggers and t-shirts, no makeup or fussing with hair most of the time, so not a likely target for a peeping Tom pervert. If it wasn't for the fact that it was my dog who alerted me to something both times, I'd wonder whether I was half asleep and dreamed it, that I'd imagined it. I have had hallucinations, once as the result of a bad reaction to an antidepressant, but that was more than a decade ago, hasn't happened before or since, and I learned how to test my reality in times I was worried about whether something really happened or not from a psychologist. When I asked how I could ever trust my own senses again after that reaction to the meds, they said that to be sure something was real, to see if other people can see or hear the thing too, or if it's a noise or voice outside. Can I see someone or something that explains the noise? If so, it's not likely to be a hallucination if both oral and visual perceptions match up. The dog sensed someone there first, and I heard and then saw someone. I wasn't dreaming or imagining it. I don't use drugs and almost never drink. I'm scientifically minded and don't believe in ghosts. And while I love a good horror film, I'm rarely freaked out by them anymore, too old and cynical. I have to think it was someone who was looking to burgle a house, but for the fact that they came back so much later, maybe someone on drugs or having a mental health episode. Or, and this one bothers me most, someone who wanted to scare me. But why? Who? They know where we live. Are they going to come back? New fears keep popping into my mind. Like most nights, I'm up at some point late at night or in the very early hours, and will let the dog outside into the back garden for a quick pee. And I'm suddenly aware of how easy it would to be attacked and gain entry then. There's a passage around the side of the house to go from the front to the back garden with only a small side gate, meant to keep the dog confined, not designed to keep others out. It would be easy for someone to access, then hide against the back of the house, completely hidden from view. They were bold enough to come back a second time, even knowing a person and a dog were in the room, perhaps hoping I would have fallen asleep by then. They seemed to be trying to really scare me when they returned the second time, doing that deep breathing noise, and stayed by the window even after I'd shouted. In those few seconds it would have taken from me shouting out until I reached the window and could move the curtains and see out. They could have moved and been long out of sight, but they'd stayed there until there was a chance I could see them, only then moving away. The breathing noises and then the coldness then ran through me when I actually saw a man moving away from the window will haunt me, along with the question of their motives. Were they trying to scare me? Why? What's to stop them from coming back? So, this happened in 2011, so the exact dialogue may have escaped my memory a bit, but the situation is something I'll never forget. Also, AIM was still pretty active during this time, and so was video chatting. Think Tiny Chat, this is important for later. I was on an online dating site, I won't say which because I'll be dragged mercilessly in the comments, and was talking to this guy. I was 31 at the time, he was 28. We talked for about 6 weeks before I gave him my phone number, and we took it offline to calling and texting for another couple of weeks. 2 months after our initial chat we were texting, and he told me that he was out having a few beers at a bar near my house. He asked what I was doing and asked if I wanted to come out, but I had a very long day at work and didn't feel like going to a bar. I'm also not a big drinker. I invited him over to my place after he finished at the bar, and he accepted. I figured I would be okay since I do keep firearms for protection and know how to defend myself if needed. I also had a webcam. I took a shower so I wouldn't smell like a water buffalo on a hot day. The air went out at work, put on some makeup and got dressed to wait. He then called and said he was outside of my house. I clicked record on my computer's webcam program and turned off my monitor and went to let him in. It's around 10 p.m. and he comes in and we go back to my bedroom because my living room was being remodeled. We're sitting on the bed chatting for about an hour, talking about everything under the sun. The conversation flowed. He was very handsome and so easy to be comfortable with. We got on the subject of firearms and I showed him mine. About 15 minutes later he asks for some water, so I go to the kitchen to get him a bottle. When I came back, he said he got a phone call and had to leave. After he left, I looked on my nightstand where I put the firearm down after showing him and noticed that it was gone. I looked everywhere for it, thinking I had put it down somewhere else. Nope, not there. I then played back the recording from my webcam program and sure enough, it shows him grabbing it and putting it in his hoodie. I was terrified at that point. He knew where I lived. He had my firearm and he left his phone on my bed. Right then his phone rings, and I answer it. Come to find out, he's married. His wife was calling him wondering where he was. I told her everything, including the fact that he stole my firearm and I had video evidence, and was calling the police on him. Next thing I know, he's banging on my door, my firearm in his hand, asking me for his phone. The conversation went like this: I need my phone. Give me my phone. Me not opening the door, but yelling through the window, take the clip out of my gun, empty the chamber, throw the clip into the bushes, the one in the chamber across the road, and put it on the ground. Now, give me my phone. I'm on the phone with your wife at the moment, and I have you on video stealing from me. I put his wife on speaker. His wife said a whole bunch of expletives. He gave a shocked face. He runs and gets in his car, then comes back. I threw your gun in the ditch. At this point, I make him empty his pockets, take his pants off, take his hoodie off, and show me that he doesn't have my gun on him. All the while, his wife is on the phone. I go outside and get in his car in the driver's seat and tell him to take me to where he threw my gun. He proceeds to tell me that I don't know how hard it is for him, being a felon, not being allowed to own a gun ever because of a mistake he made. The mistake? Domestic violence involving a gun. We get up the road. He tells me the gun is there in the ditch. Then I realize the situation I'm in. I can get out of the car and go get it, leaving him to do whatever to me if he chose. He was 6'4", 225 pounds, me 5'3", 135 pounds at the time, or I could make him go get it, taking a chance of him seriously hurting me. I took that chance, since I was on his phone with his wife. And my phone with 911, he retrieves my gun, brings it back to the car, and I drive back to my house and wait on the police. I get out of the car, and he gets in the driver's seat. I'm still on the phone with the police. I walk around the back of his car to get his license plate number, and he just puts his car in reverse, hits me, and takes off. They found him later that evening. He still had the clip and the one in the chamber in his pocket, so now he's enjoying time in prison. So glad I never have to meet this person again. I'm keeping some of these details vague because I seriously don't want the hosts to find out that I published this story. I don't think they would approve. I hope that is alright, and I'll try to still make it as comprehensive as possible. I spent a year studying in Mexico recently, and as you do on exchange, I tried to travel as much as I could. Between the semesters, there is a big break in me and my buddy that I spent the most time with during the exchange decided we'd go on a longer backpacking trip through Mexico together. We had a rough plan on where to go and what we wanted to see, but we hadn't even booked our flight back yet, nor were we sure from where we would take it from. We wanted to keep it flexible. We had an amazing time, and a few days before our trip ended, we finally decided we would take our flight from a city that was close and had really cheap flights, but the city itself didn't really have anything to offer. Then on Airbnb we found a room very close to the airport and a house with a pool. And we thought we'd just treat ourselves to a relaxed pool day at the end of the trip. It turned out that the hosts were a family. The husband was Mexican and the wife was from Europe and could even speak our native language, so we arranged that we would take a bus to the airport and that they would pick us up from there. When we finally arrived at the city, it was already dark, and the bus driver refused to drive us to the airport since it was not directly on his route, so he just dropped us off on the highway. That was already a pretty bad situation to begin with, standing with our backpacks at the side of the road in the middle of nowhere in a not-so-safe city in Mexico. But I called the hosts and sent them our GPS location, and they say no problem, they will come and get us. So the husband came to pick us up, and it was a very uncomfortable situation getting into the car with a stranger in the night in the middle of nowhere. It also didn't help that the guy looked like Danny Trejo without a mustache. And as I tried to make small talk with him, he only gave monosyllabic answers or straight out ignored me. Well, he's just not a big talker, I thought, and hoped we would arrive soon. Looking back, I can see a million red flags, but for some reason, at that time we just didn't see them. Either we were too tired, or to be honest, we didn't really have any other choice than going along anyway. But yes, we arrive, and that should have immediately set alarms off. We were in the middle of nowhere. There were fields with sheep and goats around, and all of a sudden, a gravel road branches off from the paved road, and along that gravel road there are about 6 huge mansions, all with 2 meters walls around them, topped with NATO fence, huge gates, and at least 2 gigantic guard dogs per house. When we entered the house, we were greeted by the wife, a bubbly middle-aged woman that was very talkative but pleasant. She had actually cooked dinner for us, and we ate while exchanging small talk. The husband just sat at the table not saying a single word. After dinner, we more or less went directly to bed because it had gotten late, and we were tired from a long day. The next morning we saw that the weather was not that good, so we decided to go into the town and just see the few touristy things it had to offer instead of spending it at the pool. When we came back it was already dark, but we decided to jump into the pool anyways to cool off, because it was very hot and humid. The wife joined us, and at some point, my friend made the mistake to ask how they were able to afford such a house that didn't really match the price range of the jobs they were telling us that they were doing, and she deflected a bit and added that her husband was very handy because he had grown up in the streets and basically built the house himself. We realized that it maybe was not the best topic and broke the conversation off. That was the last day of our trip, and we had our flight back home early the next morning. We still had some weed left that we had bought on the trip, and we thought it would be nice to smoke one out since it was our last night. But as this was a family home, and they had kids around. We thought it would be better to speak to our hosts if they would mind. So later in the evening we asked the wife if it would be okay if we smoked on the terrace, which for some reason she found quite amusing, and started laughing. She shouted to her husband, who was lying on the couch watching TV, "My love, the boys asked if it would be okay if they smoked some weed. What do you think?" And he just laughed, but didn't give an answer. We looked at her with a dumbfounded expression, and she told us sure, just go ahead. So we went to the terrace and started smoking our joint. Later they joined us, and we just had a chat. And this is where things got really messed up. For some reason, they started asking all sorts of questions about the weed, where we got it, how much it was, who we got it from, and how much we would have to pay for that back in Europe. They just seemed way too interested in the weed, and at one point, the wife just nonchalantly revealed to us, yes, we thought about doing that as a source of income, selling weed, but too many people die doing that, because the cartels don't like that. Actually, my husband used to kill people for doing that. I immediately felt sober. Did she just say? And as if he read my mind, her husband added, yes, when I was about 16, I killed a lot of people for the cartel for money. And he said it in a tone as if he just said he used to mow lawns. When he was a teenager, I still thought I must have misunderstood, so I texted my friend who was sitting across the table from me, trying not to make eye contact, because I knew we would freak each other out. He confirmed that I had indeed understood right. We discussed what we should do and agree that there's no immediate threat, and that we just should stay. We don't have anywhere else to go anyways, and it is already late. But things got even crazier. We tried to keep our composure and not completely freak out while still making conversation with our hosts. A few minutes later though, the husband got up and went inside to get something, and he came back with a literal kilo of weed pressed into a brick. He proceeded to break bits off the brick and roll them into a joint that would probably have knocked out Snoop Dogg. It was about the size of my thumb, and I guess it had about 2 grams of weed in there. Of course, he offered the joint to us, but we politely declined, saying that we were already pretty stoned. He seemed a little offended, but fortunately, he bought our excuse. But it got even worse. A few minutes later, we hear a couple of loud bangs. The wife became a bit uneasy and asked, "What was that?" To which he answered calmly 9mm to confirm my suspicion that there had indeed been shots. I would say it was around 7 or something shots, fired pretty quickly after each other. The wife got nervous and asked if we should maybe go inside, and what do you think they are shooting at in the air? At cows? At people? But he just shrugged it off, and we stayed outside. Again a few minutes later, there were more shots, this time even closer. The wife got even more upset and asked again, should we maybe go inside? What do you think they are shooting at? Should we go inside? And I think I will never forget when he answered in the calmest way imaginable, "No, everything's okay. I didn't hear any screams yet." I don't know why, but the way he just calmly said that freaked me the hell out, and is still making my heart beat whenever I think about it. After that, we quickly excused ourselves and went to our room. When we finally could talk, we basically both lost it and panicked. What the hell were we supposed to do? We are locked into a house with a contract killer in the middle of absolutely nowhere, and people are shooting outside. We decided it was probably our best bet to stay, because we thought, well, we are his guests, he is not going to harm us, hopefully, and it's better to have walls and dogs and a serial killer in between us and people shooting around. So we barricaded ourselves in the room and didn't sleep a second until the morning, when we hopped the hell out of there and went to the airport. I was never so happy to be patted down at security in my whole life. I'm writing this as a memoir of what happened while it's still fresh in my mind, and to share it with all of the amazing people here on the Let's Not Meet subreddit. I've been reading all of you for almost a year now, and I feel like I should share my story. I'll have to leave some details out, for reasons you'll soon learn. This happened 1 year, and 2 days ago, it was the day I never expected to come. It changed my life in so many ways that I still feel like I cannot digest it. I want to start saying a little bit about myself, so you understand the context. and why it was so weird and foreign for something like this to happen to me. I'm a fairly geeky guy. I love science fiction and video games. I worked at the time as a design engineer in a factory and spent most of my weekends with friends, hiking, playing board games, or watching movies. So you realize nothing I did would attract the attention of the cartels. I do not have a lot of money. I just live a lower middle class type of life here in Mexico. But the real issue was my sister, who has a high-ranking position in the public security area of politics. That is the reason I was targeted. It was a Tuesday early morning. I was on my way to work, which started at 6 a.m. I remember that day I took my dad's SUV because they were away on vacation, and I was supposed to pick them up at the airport after work that day. I lived about half an hour away from my work, so I left at about 5:25 a.m. every morning. When I was leaving, I saw a pretty shady SUV parked like a block away from my house. And honestly, after my sister took her job, I was more aware about things that I saw out of place. I felt a little bit paranoid because weeks before it happened, I felt like someone was following me. So yeah, I passed this SUV and saw a guy on the driver's seat with a baseball cap. I stopped for a bit, looked him straight in the eye, and he just looked down and covered his face. I honestly didn't think too much of it. My family had been telling me weeks prior that I was just overreacting, and no one was following me, so I thought it was just some random guy waiting for someone. I took off to work, and for me to get there, I have to go through a really ugly neighborhood, which is poorly lit and has a really bad reputation. I was in a 2-lane street that's only one way. I was in the right lane at the time and saw a Jeep Cherokee just speed by me on the left lane, and then continue its way in front of me. When we arrived at the end of the street, I had to turn right to get to work, and the Cherokee just completely stopped on the right lane in front of me, with their blinker signaling to the left. I found it kinda weird, but I did not want to be an asshole and honk at them and wanted to give them a few seconds to move. While I was waiting, a freaking Explorer came screeching on the left lane. It stopped next to me, and 4 guys came out of it with guns, and one with a baseball bat. The guy with the bat smashed my window and hit me in the face, while another put a gun to my head and said, "Esto es de verdad, pendejo." Valle del Caro translates to, "This is real, asshole. Get out of the car." So, please understand that at the moment I did not feel like they wanted to steal my car. I already knew they were trying to kidnap me. If I knew they just wanted the car, I would have given the car to them. But I pieced everything together, the cars that I felt were following me at night every day, the guy just sitting on the SUV outside of my place, and obviously my sister's job. I knew that if they took me, it would be torture followed by certain death. And if they really wanted to kidnap me, they would not kill me. So I stepped on the gas, I smashed between the Cherokee and the Explorer, and ran over one of the guys. I spat as much as the SUV would give me and honked so I could make a lot of noise, and people would notice. My hope was to get to my workplace, which had private security, and call my sister so she could talk to the police. With all the adrenaline on me, I passed the entrance to my work and tried to turn back, but I crashed on a corner. At that moment, I honestly felt like my heart would come out of my mouth. Everything moved so slow, so I tried to calm myself down. I breathed, saw through my mirrors if they were following me, and I saw no one. An empty street that was already lit by the morning dusk. The SUV was still working. I turned around, got to my work, yelled at the security guards to open the doors. I parked at the entrance, got out of the car, and called my sister. After that, I went inside and talked to my boss about what had happened and went to the restroom to clean the glass and blood off my hair and face. When I came out of the restroom and out to the parking lot, there were about 10 cop cars outside my workplace. My sister had already told me to speak with a specific police officer and confirm his name. Everything went smooth, and I felt safe and protected. After that, I moved into my sister's house, which has police guarding it. I have bodyguards that are with me every time I go out. This has cost me my job, relationships, lifelong friendships. Everyone's afraid to hang out with you when they know you are a target for the cartels. And it's understandable, but it does not make it feel any less awful. investigations continued through the beginning of 2017. I later found out through security camera footage that there were 3 vans in total with about 12 people trying to kidnap me. I found out that the cartel that was after me was one of the most powerful cartels in the world, and that the person who was in charge of investigating my case was killed. So, right now I'm working for the Mexican government. It's a low-profile job which does not pay much and does not attract too much attention. I've looked for ways to leave the country, but I do not have enough money or qualifications. I'm a college dropout. I'm still living with my sister, with people protecting me and my family 24 hours a day, and the guys who tried to kidnap me are still at large. I'm trying to make the best of this situation. I've lost a lot of weight, I spend more time with my nephews, and recently got into a steady relationship. But honestly, I'm always on edge and feel like I'm in imminent danger. So, to the guys who tried to kidnap me, let's not meet. I went to summer camp in a rural part of New Jersey back in the mid-1990s. The camp was situated on a long, narrow man-made lake. One end of the lake was reserved for swimming, which we do as a group activity every other day or so. The swimming area had one long dock stretching straight out into the water and 2 square floating docks further out. One of the 2 floating docks was a bit far away, and although I had spent a few summers at this camp at the time of this incident, I had never seen anyone use the second dock. One day our group of about a dozen 11-year-olds got the bright idea that we were going to swim out to the faraway dock. I would consider this to be a moderate challenge for a casual swimmer. When we reached the dock, I noticed a strange-looking spider on the ladder that you had to use to climb up. It was quite large in terms of overall footprint, probably about 2 inches, 5 centimeters from end to end, with long skinny legs. Spiders, of course, are normal critters to encounter in nature, but this one stood out to me because of its unusual appearance. After the long swim, we took a few minutes to lie on the dock and rest in the sun. It was relaxing, and we were all having a good time. We started messing around and decided to play one of our regular games where we would all shuffle toward the corner of the dock, causing it to sink. As the corner of the dock started to sink and fill with water, suddenly hundreds of giant spiders came frantically pouring out from between the boards, swarming over and around the feet of those of us who were still standing on dry ground. This dock was theirs, apparently. We all immediately began to scream and jump into the water trying to get away, but the spiders were in the water too, and stuck to us as we swam. I vividly remember the feeling of them clinging to my wet hair, fleshy bodies, and long squirming legs hopelessly intertwined with my own strands. Adrenaline propelled us back to the main part of the swimming area, and by the time we got there, thankfully we were spider-free, but this is a childhood trauma that lingers with me. I had not really been afraid of spiders before, but I would say this was a major turning point. The thought of us lying on the dock in the sun, completely oblivious to the horde that was lurking just inches beneath us, creeps me out to this day. A few months back, my girlfriend and I were bored hanging around the house and spontaneously decided to go out for a hike. We don't go hiking often, but the idea appealed to both of us, and even though there was only about an hour left of light, we figured we had enough time to go enjoy a hike before it got too dark. We quickly fill up our water bottles and put on the best walking shoes we had, and we were out the door, driving up into the mountains. Around my area, there are many hiking trails, with the variety of trails increasing as you go up into the mountains. We tended to stay around the base of the mountains in the occasional case of us hiking, where most people would still be walking, but we wanted to change things up and progress further up the mountain road to a trail a friend of mine had mentioned. We kept in mind our time, and figured that we could hike for a bit and simply enjoy the new environment for us, and finish up before it was too late. We arrived at the trailhead and see that there were no cars left along the road where the trail commences, but didn't think much of it due to the time. We still had a good 45 minutes until dark, so we continued on. We start walking down a fairly steep hill that then recoups the elevation at the bottom with an equally steep hill that you have to ascend. We reach the top and then it's smooth sailing from there. We see a lone coyote off of the trail a ways off, and some rabbits, and I made a quip about how those rabbits might need to be careful with that coyote lurking around. She playfully hit me for that one. Approximately less than a mile into the trail, we see a large, fallen tree that made a bridge over a dried riverbed and decided to take a rest, climb around on it, and take pictures. We're there for about 10 minutes and then resume hiking. We continue on the trail for a short distance until she hears a rustle in the trees behind us. We stop, mildly spooked due to the assumed size of whatever made that rustling, but continue on only briefly before she decides she's done and that we need to head back. It's twilight now, so I agree with her and we turn around to head back to the car. When we made it back to the fallen tree, my shoe had come untied, so I used the trunk to fix my loose laces and look behind us for the first time on the hike. I see a person dressed entirely in black with their hood on that was a significant distance behind us, walking at a slow, even pace. It wasn't something out of the ordinary, so what if they're wearing black with their hood on? I wear black most of the time, and it's cold out. I shouldn't make assumptions. This does trigger me to be more alert, however, and I inform my girlfriend of this person's presence. It's now dusk. We continue on at an intentionally faster pace and go through a winding section of the trail, and I lose sight of the person. When we come around the final bend of the section, I figure they're far behind us, and that there's nothing to worry about. Sooner than later the person is behind us again, but much closer, probably 50 feet in comparison to 100 feet before, and we had increased our speed, so this alarmed us. We briskly walk around another bend, and as soon as we come around it, we book it. It seemed to be a natural reaction on both of our parts as we just started running without a word said to initiate it. We are nearing the trailhead now, with only the hills to deal with. We catch our breaths for a moment, and I turn around again. I see the person seemingly halt a sprint upon noticing me looking back, as if they were trying to uphold the illusion of simply walking. At this point I shout go, and we sprint down the hill. What little light was left struggled to make its way through the dense trees surrounding us, and the steep hill proved challenging to run down without a clear path to be seen. We both stumble down the hill, almost falling multiple times and slamming our feet onto rocks and loose brush, but we didn't fall and we didn't look behind us. We make it to the bottom, but must continue up the initial hill, and then we will have made it out. We persevere up the incline and make it back to our car. I briefly breathe in relief as I start my car, heart pounding and adrenaline racing. As I reverse onto the road, the person emerges at the trailhead, apparently breathing heavily. We finally get a glimpse of him. His hood had fallen off of his head, exposing his pale complexion and dead eyes that were only illuminated by a single lantern at the start of the trail. He was holding something in his hand, but it was too dark to see and I was not interested in sticking around to make out the object. I shift into drive and accelerate as fast as my car could muster, leaving him behind in the dust of the empty side of the road. My trail stalker dude, let's not meet. I'm quarantined with my mom. We're both avoiding going out when possible because we're both compromised. So we just take short trips for any errands we need to complete in order to not go stir crazy. Today, she needed to get gas and we needed a few groceries, so we both went. We saw my cousin at the gas station, and after I went to one of the pumps, I said hello while my mom went to pay for her gas. After she paid, I started pumping the gas, and we all stood there chatting for a moment. When my cousin returned to the car, a man came out of the gas station. He was balding, unkempt, a patchy, short beard and old glasses, the kind you see in high school photos from the 80s. He was wearing a sort of tropical shirt with a notepad and pen in the pocket and dirty khakis and a tan jacket. He stopped at my cousin's car and talked to her. She's kind of small, so I stood there watching until she got in her car safely, and I heard it start. My mom and I were pumping the last bit of gas into the car. Both of us didn't need to do it, but we were both just glad to be outside for a moment. The guy walked to us while she was finishing up and said, "Are you having fun?" We just kind of glanced at each other and my mom said yeah, and swatted me to make me go to my side of the car. I didn't go, I didn't want to until she was in the car herself. The guy then turned to me and said, "Are you having fun with your granddaughter?" As if he were trying to make a joke, but his facial expression never changed. I just kind of gave him a blank stare and said, "That's my mom." I squeezed between him and the bumper and moved to my side of the car. He followed closely and said, "I just came here from Michigan. I've been here for 10 years. I got in and held on to my door." He stared at where I was holding the door, then at my face again. I was giving him the same blank stare and said, "That's nice." My dog stuck his nose out and began barking at this guy. He's a 15 pounds Yorkie and usually sweet, but sounded like an angry guard dog while he was barking this time. "Is the dog having fun?" the guy asked. I held onto the door tighter and said, "I guess so. Have a nice day." I closed the door quickly, locked it, and my mom drove off. My cousin drove after us. She had been watching the entire time, waiting for either us or the guy to leave. My mom and I both remarked that the guy was creepy, and we thought he might try to jump in the car. I'm glad I went with her today. For some background on me, I'm a 5'3" female. I used to have my hair colored in bright colors. At the time of the story, it was bright blue. And at the time of these two incidents, I was in my very early 20s. I live in the central part of Texas, born and raised here. It was a little after I had first gotten my driver's license, when my mom had asked me to run to Walmart in order to pick up some groceries for dinner. I figured sure, why not? Plus I had just gotten paid. Maybe I could buy something for myself as well. Now usually when I go shopping anywhere, I always have my phone and headphones with me so I can listen to music while I shop. This day, however, I left my phone at home on its charger. Sucks, but whatever. I wasn't gonna take long to get what I needed. As I'm walking through the store, grabbing dinner, I start realizing something was off. I couldn't really understand why, but I started feeling like I was being followed. I looked around me as discreetly as I could and didn't really notice anyone. A few families, some college kids, and then this one guy in a dirty wife beater. I shrugged it off and figured I was just being paranoid, so I continued on my way. But every so often I'd get that feeling of being watched, so I'd keep looking around and I never saw anything weird. Except, on my journey into a third aisle, I noticed the guy in the dirty wife beater again. He was some older white guy, maybe mid to late 40s. He had short orange blonde hair, a bit of facial scruff, and some sort of facial tic. He looked a little off. He was standing and staring. He didn't even have a shopping cart from what I remember, and he just stared at me. I turned back around and figured maybe I was blocking his path. I grabbed my cart and started wandering over to where the art supplies were, since I needed a new sketchbook, and I could still feel him following me the entire time. At that point I started getting a little freaked out. I'd never had this happen before, so then I decided I'd try losing him by going through different aisles. At first it worked, and I decided now would be my time to leave, so I head up to a cashier, pay for everything, and make my way out. Then I suddenly hear someone behind me call out, "Don't leave yet, baby." I looked back behind me because I knew that comment was directed at me, and lo and behold, the guy in the dirty wife beater. I just ignored him and booked out of the store. As I make it to the car though, I keep hearing him behind me saying things like, "Come back and I'm talking to you." Thankfully I managed to get everything in the car and book it out of the parking lot before he got to me. I was shaking by the time I got home. I thought about telling my parents about what happened, but decided not to. I figured it was a one-off kind of thing. Boy, was I wrong. About a few months later, my mom, Em, and one of my older sisters, C, went to the same Walmart to do some more grocery shopping. I told no one about the incident from months prior, but I did gain a tendency to carry my pocket knife with me at all times afterwards, just for added safety. So we're walking in, talking about something dumb, or about what we were supposed to get, I can't remember, when all of a sudden I looked ahead of us and just froze in my steps. Right in front of us was Mr. Dirty Wife Beater, still looking grungy as all hell, and looking straight at me. M and C had noticed my sudden lack of movement when this guy walks closer to us, never looking elsewhere besides my face, and starts rambling about my colored hair. Why do you change your hair? Is it to get men to look at you? Because I'm looking. Those are the words that are still ingrained into my brain. My mom looked at him confused. Same with my sister. I was still shocked and tense with just how uncomfortable I was and how scared I felt. I didn't really know what to do. Thankfully, maybe due to my fear, I managed to start power walking ahead of my mom and sister while this guy just kept talking. When I stopped in the baking aisle, M and C asked me what that was all about. I finally told them and M started getting concerned, asking me if maybe I should get security involved. For some reason, maybe my anxiety, I decided not to get security involved. I did end up that entire trip looking over my shoulders constantly to make sure we didn't get followed out to the car. So yeah, crazy and or possibly doped up guy in a wife beater, let's not meet. This happened yesterday, and I still can't believe it happened. I'll explain it all at the end, so I'm sorry if it's confusing at first. I've recently moved into a new apartment 3 weeks ago, and I'm sharing it with my sister. The only person we know properly is a single mom who lives in the apartment next to us. Ever since we moved in, she's been giving us advice and helping us out with things, etc. We don't know any of our other neighbors properly yet. Today I was out with friends, and after that I went to get my sister so we could go out for some food. We got home around 10 p.m. My sister and I got into our pajamas, and were sitting around watching TV when our buzzer rang. I jumped up to answer it, and it turned out to be our neighbor's single mom. I asked her what was up and she said that our dad is asking for us downstairs. Straight away my stomach dropped. I immediately asked her if she's sure he said that he was our dad. The reason I asked this was just to make sure that is what she actually said, but she replied that yeah, he said he was our dad and he was asking for us. The neighbor then asked me if she could let him up to our flat, but I told her no. I wanted to shout out to my sister, but I didn't want to worry her right away, so I asked the neighbor to not let him come up yet, and I heard her repeat this to him. I couldn't hear anything for a few minutes, and I started to get really worried. At this point, my sister comes up to me and asks who it is. I called out to my neighbor a few times, but she didn't answer. It must have only been about a minute, but it honestly felt like ages when she didn't reply. I was about to tell my sister to call 911 because I was starting to panic, and I didn't know what was happening out there, but then she came back on and told me that he was gone. She then came up to our flat and explained what went down. She said that she was walking back to her flat after finishing work, and she saw a man by the buzzers. At first she assumed that he was just someone who lived there, but when he noticed her walking up, he asked for us by name and asked if she could let him up to our flat. She asked him who he was and he told her that he was our dad. Obviously, she buzzed us and told us first, since our neighbor doesn't know us that well, so she doesn't know what our dad looks like. She said that because we're young and on our own, she didn't want to buzz a strange man up to our flat. She said that her mom instincts kicked in when she heard me being hesitant to let him up the flat. She said that apparently after he heard me say that, he got really pushy with her and started trying to move her out of the way. He kept on saying to her, "It's okay, I'm their dad. Let me and I'm not going to do anything." She started arguing with him and told him that if I don't feel comfortable letting him in, there's no way he's getting in. He then called her a name and got into a car, and right away, now this is the reason why I hesitated. We haven't spoke to our dad since I was 16. We even considered getting a restraining order from him at one point. He's even not our biological father, but we were legally adopted by him when I was 9. He was very abusive. It got to the point where me, my sister, and my mom had to leave him in the middle of the night. He was always really controlling, and after we left he would secretly follow us around and leave threatening voicemails on the phone. I found out that he has a criminal record as well, and I believe he was convicted of manslaughter in the 80s. I have no idea of the backstory behind that, and I honestly don't really want to know. Like I said, we haven't heard from him since I was 16, which was 3 years ago, and as soon as she said the word dad, I almost had a panic attack. I asked her to describe him, and she said that because it was dark out she couldn't really see him. We ended up staying with her because me and my sister are really shaken up. I don't know whether to call the cops or not. I don't know if it's him or not, as it could easily be someone else. I appreciate any advice. In 2019, I moved to a post-Soviet country for work. There's this American diner I always go to on the weekends for lunch. It's a one-of-a-kind place in the city, owned by this half-Cuban dude who loves the USA. Not surprisingly, the place attracts lots of American expats who want to feel home. It takes me around 25 minutes to get there walking from my apartment, but as it gets extremely cold during winter months, I always take a taxi that drops me off next to a big mall, on the opposite side of the narrow street where the diner is. The street is inaccessible by car. It's hard to describe it, but the best way to reach the restaurant's entrance is by crossing the fenced garden of an old wooden church. It's an Orthodox church from the 19th century turned into a museum. It is now surrounded by massive office buildings. The garden is small, you can cross it in 3 minutes, and the exit gate faces the restaurant. During winter, snow covers it completely. It was a Sunday morning, January if I recall correctly, and the snow was fresh on the floor. I was walking to the diner when I noticed unusual footprints in the snow, as if someone was walking in circles, back and forth, and for a long period, but there was nobody around and all of the office buildings seemed to be closed. I keep walking. All of a sudden, a man that was hiding behind the church reveals himself. He doesn't look hostile, but there's something extremely odd about him. He's wearing baggy jeans, a dirty hoodie, and a blue cap. It was extremely cold and his outfit was not the best for the weather. He approaches me smiling. He starts walking on my side. "Hey there," in English. "Hey, where are you from?" "Don't be afraid, I like foreigners. The vast majority of the population there looks East Asian, so it's easy to tell I'm not a local." His English is surprisingly good. I keep walking in silence. "You don't need to be afraid, my friend. I'm part of the couch surfing community. I'm a nice guy. Look." He tries to show me something on his phone, maybe his couch surfing profile page. "Would you stay at my place?" he says. "No dude, thank you," I say. Then he goes, "Okay, would you give me some money to buy us both coffee? You don't have to come with me, what the hell." At that moment I was already in front of the restaurant and casually opened the door to enter. He didn't follow me. 2 weeks later, same Sunday routine, lunch at the diner, and then back home. On my way, I decided to grab a coffee at a nearby place. As I'm walking to the shop, I feel someone following me. It's him, again, and wearing the same clothes. We make eye contact, and he starts laughing. Then he proceeds to do an extremely creepy thing. He hides behind a bus stop that has glass panels on the sides and keeps staring at me. I mean, I could still see him. He was being a complete creep on purpose. I enter the coffee shop and tell the employee, "Hey, there's a guy following me." The girl looks at me worried and says something to the security guard. It's common to see guards in all shops there. The guy enters the shop. The moment the door closes behind him, the employee looks at the guard, who immediately removes him from the place. They were so fast it almost seemed as if they knew him. Thankfully, I never saw him again. So, after listening to many creepy stories on YouTube, I've decided to make a Reddit account to submit my own that I still haven't managed to get over. This is quite the long one, so just bear with me. I've encountered a person that I'll call Window Man that has really messed me up. This happened in summer 2018, so about 8 months ago. Some background story to help better understand the situation I was in and the layout of the apartment. My mom and I moved into this one-room apartment with one of my mom's colleagues, all females, for a short period of time, about 3 months, to be able to save up some money for another apartment that we currently live in. So, the apartment had a small bathroom and shower, a kitchen merged with the living room, a small room separated by a sliding door, and a windowed balcony. We lived on the first floor, and even I, being the short 5'4" girl, managed to climb up into the window when I forgot my keys at home. Anyways, Since the colleague needed some privacy, she chose to live in the small room. My mom would sleep on the couch in the living room and I'd sleep on the balcony on a mattress. Now, when I would lay on my mattress, from my point of view I'd see the living room and the couch on my right, and the windows on my left, though there were some behind me that I wasn't really able to see. Alright, now to the actual story. We moved in. Everything was going great the first month or so. I felt quite safe even though I was very suspicious from the very start of the windows since we lived on the first floor. And I should mention that I've never experienced anything paranormal nor have I had sleep paralysis before. So, one night I wake up, or at least I think so. I can't move. I can only blink my eyes and move my head. I look over to the windows, and I see what looks like a third of a man's head and a hand peeking through the window. I tried to scream and get up, but I couldn't move or do anything. I was so terrified. I saw the man slowly closing the window as if he was trying to not make any sound and lowering his head as if he were leaving. I was freaking out, but still couldn't move. I saw my mom on my right, sleeping on the couch, and on my left my hand was hanging off the mattress, and my cat was headbutting it as if he's trying to wake me up. I try to scream again a few times, but it doesn't work. I'm hysterical at this point, and I feel tears welling up in my eyes. Suddenly, I wake up. I shoot up from my bed, my cat still next to the mattress, and my mom still on the couch, sleeping in the same position I've seen her in. I look at the window panicking, and it's locked from the inside, just like I left it before going to sleep. I unlocked it and opened it, making sure that there's nobody outside. I close and lock the window, and lay back down, sobbing. I just cried myself to sleep that night. A few days later, I've decided to tell my mom about the dream. I didn't want to at first because I thought that she wouldn't pay much attention to it. But since it had me so on edge, I told her, and just as I expected, she told me that I've been listening to too many horror stories and didn't take me too seriously. After maybe a week, I forgot about the dream and moved on. And then, one evening, everything was going fine. I was preparing myself for the next day since I had to do a big presentation in front of the whole class, and I wanted to look my best. It was about midnight. I took a shower, brushed my teeth, and went to sleep as usual. My mom was still up on her phone but about to go to sleep. I doze off peacefully, but suddenly I wake up for no reason and have the massive urge to look behind me at the windows. To my horror, I saw a tall man in my window, about halfway in, with one leg almost on the floor. I panicked and thought that I was dreaming again, but quickly realized that I can move. So no, I wasn't dreaming. Still being in a state of fear and confusion, I whispered, "What the hell?" And to my complete horror, the man looked up, all dark but eyes shining in the moonlight, put on the creepiest ear-to-ear grin, put a finger to his lips, and shushed me in the most menacing way ever. I had no idea what to do, so I said louder, "What the hell?" And then I jumped up and screamed, "What the hell?" and started screaming like a banshee. The guy got startled and almost fell back, so I took the opportunity and closed and locked the window just as he was about to try to get back in. My screaming woke my mom up and she ran up asking what happened. I started nervously explaining all that happened, and then we saw the dude climb up to our window again, but the one right next to me, trying to open it. As I saw that, I screamed even louder, and as he was opening it I pushed him and he fell down, calling me every name under the sun. He then tried to make up some awful excuse, but in my panicked state I started yelling at him at the top of my lungs to get the hell out. I kept on yelling for about 5 minutes like a total crazy person until the guy finally said something along the lines of "fine," then almost as if I was obliged to let him in, and started walking away. I slammed all the windows shut and locked them, sat down on my mattress, and proceeded to sob loudly as my mom was next to me, trying to calm me down. We thought that was it, but a few minutes later I saw him again, climbing up our balcony, and I started screaming again, opened one of the windows and yelled so loud that I almost lost my voice. I closed and locked the window, and my mom, and I went to the guard to tell him what happened. I described the man to him as best as I could, but since it was dark I couldn't say much about his appearance. He told us to just go home and stay calm, that he'll handle the situation. When we were going back, we saw about 8 neighbors of ours standing outside wondering what happened. They all gave us sympathetic looks as we went back home. My mom gave me some medicine to help calm me down, and I was crying and shaking vigorously for about an hour until I finally was so exhausted that I just went to sleep with her, since I didn't want to sleep on the balcony anymore. The next day I showed up to school looking like trash, and when I told someone what happened, they either didn't believe me or would brush it off saying it's fine, you're alright now. After a few days my mom confronted me about it and said she was sorry that she didn't take my dreams seriously, though I wasn't mad at all, just shocked. She said that she was just about to fall asleep but woke up to me screaming. She told me that my screams were the most blood-curdling ones she's ever heard in her life. But the scariest part is that I woke up for no reason. I just had the massive urge to look back. There was absolutely no noise when the man opened the window and was climbing in. I even asked my mother if she heard anything, and she said that no, it was absolutely silent. Who knows what the man would have done if I wouldn't have woken up, though I'm glad I didn't have to find out. The fact that also really shook me is that I had a dream of something similar happening about 3 weeks before it actually happened in real life. Though sadly I don't know what happened to that man, if he was arrested or not. We never saw him again, but either way I'm just glad that we moved out of that apartment soon later. And to you, window man, that has traumatized me that day, let's not meet again. This happened to me my freshman year of college. Tinder was new, and everyone at my university was on the app. I joined to see what all of the fuss was about. Looking through profiles, I found a few guys that were really interesting, and this one guy in particular caught my eye. We will call him Walter. I swiped right on Walter, and we matched. I was excited and kinda giddy because he was super attractive. He messages me and I got butterflies in my stomach. We message on the app for maybe an hour. Typical conversation is happening. I asked what he did for a living. He asked what my major was. Harmless conversation. After a while he asked for my number so we could text instead of message on this app. I gave it to him. He seemed nice enough. We messaged back and forth for a few days. Lots of flirty conversation, and plans to hang out finally occurred. By the 4th day of conversation he started calling me babe, which gave me mixed feelings. It was cute, but also a little weird. We didn't really know each other and had never met. I ignored it and continued on with the conversation. He started saying he wanted to be exclusive, and he really wanted to see me in person. He was begging me at this point to come to his apartment to cuddle and watch movies with him and his dog. I told him that our first meet needed to be in public. I would not be going to some stranger's apartment. He said I was overreacting and kept begging. I ignored him for the rest of the night. The next day he apologized and said he understood we needed to meet in public, so we made plans that weekend. The weekend came faster than I expected, and it was the day we were supposed to meet. Something just fell off, and I decided to back out. I texted him apologizing, saying my mom wasn't feeling well and needed me to come home to help her with some house chores. This made him annoyed, and he said your mom is a big girl. If she needs you, she can call you. Just come over and you can leave whenever to go help her. I really want to see and kiss you. I told him now that I would be staying with my mom that weekend, and that was that. I only lived about 30 minutes from home, so I actually did go home to see my mom that day. After what he said about my mom, I started ignoring him, and the texts started rolling in. Text after text. Babe, I'm sorry. Please come over. Babe, I miss you. Are you going to come over? I planned on replying the next day that I was just busy with my mom. Then he started calling me. I had a total of 45 missed phone calls within a 2-hour period. He left voicemails saying he was sorry, and he just missed me and wanted me to call him back. Similar voicemails continued almost the entire time I was home. My roommate texted me shortly after I finished dinner with my mom and asked if we could go out that night. I agreed and went back to my university dorm. Suddenly the calls from Walter started to increase again. More texts, voicemails, and he started messaging me again on Tinder, asking why I wasn't replying to him. I wasn't planning on replying until I got a message on Instagram that said, "Why didn't you tell me you were coming back to town tonight?" Getting this message really freaked me out. I replied to them and said, "Sorry, I've been busy with my mom." How did you know I was back in town? He said, well, I checked your Tinder. Of course, Tinder doesn't tell exact locations, but has a within 1 mile message. This really freaked me out, and I messaged him back and said that he was being really creepy. He seriously had to be constantly refreshing my profile to see the distance change. The messages, calls, and voicemails continued. All were him now apologizing for making me feel weird about him knowing where I was. He was just worried about me. We had been texting for less than a full week. I told my roommate about it, and so we decided to stay in that night. The last straw for me was getting a message saying, look, I'm really sorry. I'm outside your dorm with flowers and chocolates. Please forgive me. Oh hell no. I called campus security and told them about this guy, and they never found anyone waiting outside any of the doors. I'm assuming he was in his car waiting for me to reply. I blocked him on all socials, phone number, deleted Tinder, and have never been back on since. I have seen him once out and about in the town, but he never recognized me, thankfully. Walter, if you ever read this, I'm glad we never met. Thanks for making me second guess every single guy I find attractive. So, I've kind of been wanting to post this for a while, but a combination of technical difficulties and residual fear have been preventing me from doing so thus far. Now, though, it's the middle of the night and I've got nothing better to do, so I'm going to get this off my chest. I grew up with parents who were reasonable, loving people, but who were also more than a little paranoid when it came to the internet. Anything that allowed anonymous communication in any form was banned, point blank, from the household. Even Club Penguin wasn't allowed because you could chat in it. Naturally, when I got my first laptop at 12, it was a piece of crap, gotten only because all of my homework that year was online. The first thing I did was start trying to talk to people online. I wasn't going in chat rooms or anything because my parents' warnings still resonated with me, but I wasn't avoiding contact either. I ended up making a DeviantArt account. I know, cringe, where I didn't do much posting as I lack artistic talent. In spite of this, however, I was contacted via private message by a guy who I'll call Joker because his profile picture was of the Joker. That should have been a warning sign in and of itself. Honestly, Joker just started talking to me out of the blue. I think I commented on one of his pieces or something, and he reached out to me to thank me for my kind words. We started talking. It turned out we had a lot of common interests. We played some of the same games, liked some of the same cartoons, etc. He seemed like a really, really nice guy. I think it was maybe a week or two in that the first uncomfortable thing happened. Even if I didn't exactly think much of it at the time, the two of us shared a somewhat misanthropic view of the world, so there were a lot of dark jokes passed back and forth between us. Sometime about a week after we first started messaging, he casually mentions thinking that the world would be better off without him. I sent him a sad face and assured him that it wouldn't, as I quite liked talking to him. He didn't say anything more about it then, so I assumed that was it. It wasn't. Joker talked about suicide a lot, as talking about it quickly morphed from passing commentary to long, graphic rants about how much he hated himself and wanted to die and what method would be best for him to do so. I spent hours talking him down over chat, terrified that one day I wouldn't be able to do enough, and he'd actually do it. As messages started to get creepy in a different way, he started telling me how grateful he was to have me, how no one had ever cared about him as much as I did, how important I was to him, how he couldn't live without me, how he'd just die if ever he were to lose me. He was obsessed. Well, one day, a couple months in, my laptop breaks. It wasn't too bad, but it still took a couple of days before everything was back in working order. I logged back into DeviantArt to find dozens of messages, all from Joker. They started off normal enough, but quickly became frantic after I didn't respond. The last message he had sent was along the lines of "I can't take this anymore," followed by a link to a picture image. The image was of a pair of slit wrists. The cuts were deep and fairly fresh looking, too, with red inflamed edges and the beginnings of an ugly scabbing just beginning to settle over the top. I was horrified. I quickly messaged him back, terrified I'd just lost a friend. and he responded, "I thought I'd lost you," he said. "I thought you'd left me. I couldn't handle the pain without you. Don't ever do that to me again." I said I wouldn't, and he seemed relieved. He only got worse from then on. It reached a point where practically our every conversation consisted of him either professing his obsession with me, threatening suicide, or both. The stress was keeping me up at night. I was terrified that one day soon I'd open up the chat and see nothing. I was utterly convinced it was my job to keep this guy alive, and that I was failing miserably at it. Joker kept escalating until one day, nearly a year in, he finally said something that frightened me so badly I had to leave. Joker started talking about how I was the last good person left on this miserable planet, and stuff like that. He waxed poetic about how much he wanted to kill himself, and said that he'd finally found a way to truly be happy. He said the only way he'd ever be able to find happiness was in killing himself and taking me with him. That way we would always be together, free from the cruel weight of the world. He started going into very detailed, very graphic descriptions of how he'd kill me. A lot of them involved carving out my heart, then clutching it to his chest, and laying beside me as he took his own life too. I was terrified, enough so that I did what I should have done a long time ago, and deleted that account. For years following that incident, I never spoke to anyone online. Even to this day, actually, there's still a lingering sense of dread when it comes to online interaction. So, to the boy who I thought was my first internet friend, I don't know what your deal was, whether you were mentally ill or purposefully malicious, or some combination of the two, but whatever the case may have been, let's not meet. Last year I was hiking in Shenandoah, Virginia. It was a planned 2-day hiking trip, myself and 2 friends. Late into the first day, one of my friends grew ill and decided to turn back. The second friend joined him, just in case it got worse. They told me to go on, and seeing as I had been looking forward to the trip, I did. As evening approached, I came upon a clearing in the forest. On a table, surrounded by tools and several cans of spray paint, was an elaborate dollhouse. It was large, perhaps 3 feet tall. Its walls and windows were open, as if it had just been built, and was drying. That lingering smell of spray paint still hung in the air around it. On the back of the house, a photo had been affixed. It was a family picture, old, perhaps taken in the 80s. Everyone in the picture looked very awkward, like they didn't want to be taking the picture, or were forced to. Not scared, just very awkward. I left it and continued on so that I might reach my planned campsite by nightfall. The wind had picked up considerably. In the distance, I heard a branch give and fall, crashing to the forest floor, startling me. I found my campsite, but was a bit unnerved by the dollhouse in the middle of nowhere. I realized I didn't want to camp out in the open where whoever was working on it might stumble upon me. I had one of those little one-person tents that stand just tall enough for a person to lay down in. I set it up behind a thick stand of brush, one side blocked off by a tall stand of rocks. I was glad for this because not only was I now hidden, but the rocks effectively blocked the heavy winds, which had now turned cold as the frigid air tumbled down from the mountains at night. The sound of the wind-churned forest was relaxing, and I think I fell asleep right away. Have you ever been awoken by a loud sound, and you're unsure what it was exactly, but some remnant of it echoes in your mind for a moment after waking? That's what happened to me sometime later in the pitch dark. I had the sensation that someone was near. I listened intently, trying to hear over the wind. I heard a man's voice somewhere in the distance, harsh, rapid, then becoming softer. He was too far away for me to discern what he was saying, but close enough that I could hear inflection and cadence. It sounded like a crazy person scolding himself. Then, his voice becoming softer, answering. As I listened, his voice grew louder and louder until I could hear his clumsy footfalls crashing towards me. He walked by where I was camped, just several feet away from the brush that concealed me. By now my eyes had adapted somewhat to the pale moonlight, but I still couldn't make out anything more than a large, massive shape. He was probably about 6'6", heavily built. He was carrying something long beneath his arm, a rolled-up tent I guessed. He was angrily talking about someone's face and how it haunted him. His voice then became childlike, and his conversation with himself turned to the topic of cheese and crackers. The dude was clearly off his rocker, that or high on something real good. After a moment he continued on, his voice receding until I could no longer hear him. I slept little that night afterward. At first light I booked it back the way I came, back to town. I noted that the dollhouse was not in the clearing when I passed back by. Whoever that stranger in the night was, I am glad we did not meet.